Why did Ibrahim Traoré release 1 million rabbits in the desert? The shocking truth, it was a blazing afternoon in the Sahel. When the news broke, Ibrahim Traoré, the enigmatic leader of Burkina Faso, had just overseen the release of 1.2 million rabbits into a vast stretch of desert. The announcement stunned the nation and, within hours, it had ricocheted across global news outlets, sparking debates from Ouagadougou to Washington. Was this an act of environmental genius, or a bizarre gamble destined for disaster? Eyewitnesses described the scene as surreal. From massive trucks and specially designed cages, waves of rabbits poured out onto the sun-baked sand, the animals white, brown, speckled, scattered in all directions, their soft paws kicking up fine dust under the punishing sun. Children in nearby villages stood wide-eyed, pointing in disbelief. Some locals clapped and cheered, others shook their heads. The desert, a place usually defined by stillness, was suddenly alive with the restless energy of millions of tiny bodies. But why? That was the question echoing everywhere, from rural markets to university lecture halls. Ibrahim Traoré's official statement came just hours later. In it, he declared that the release was part of a bold ecological restoration project. The desert is not dead, he proclaimed in a nationally broadcast address. It is sleeping. We will wake it, and life will return. According to the rabbits would help till the land naturally, fertilizing it with their droppings and breaking the hard crust of the soil with their constant digging. Over time, he argued, this would make the region more hospitable for plants, which in turn could help combat desertification. The plan was inspired, at least in part, by older ecological experiments, such as the use of goats in certain African regions to clear invasive shrubs, or the famous Australian rabbit population explosion, though the latter was remembered more as a cautionary tale than a success. And that's exactly why many were skeptical. Some farmers from surrounding communities immediately voiced concerns. Rabbits are not just diggers, said Amadou Diallo, a herder whose goats grazed near the release zone. They are eaters. They will eat everything green before it has a chance to grow. If they multiply, what will stop them from coming to our fields? His worries were echoed by environmental scientists from across the globe. Dr. Celeste Imbe, an ecologist from Senegal, described the plan as bold but extremely risky. She pointed out that in the wrong balance, rabbit populations could devastate vegetation, leading to soil erosion rather than preventing it. They reproduce rapidly. This is both their strength and their danger, she said in a televised interview. In Nigeria, rabbits were introduced for sport, and they became one of the most destructive, invasive species in history. Without natural predators or proper management, the same could happen here. Yet others saw potential. Professor Lionel Carreri, a French soil biologist, called the project a fascinating live experiment. He noted that rabbits' constant burrowing could improve water infiltration in arid soils, and their waste could enrich otherwise nutrient-poor land. If managed with predator balance, perhaps through hawks or foxes, it could succeed, he suggested. In the following weeks, the desert around the release zone became a hotspot for journalists, scientists, and curious onlookers. Drone footage captured mesmerizing images of enormous rabbit herds moving like living rivers across dunes. Social media lit up with videos of rabbits nibbling at scrubby plants, digging shallow burrows, and huddling together at dusk. Hashtags like #TRAORE rabbits and #Desert Miracle trended worldwide. But trouble wasn't far behind. Within a month, reports emerged that the rabbits were eating through small patches of crops in fringe farming communities. A group of villagers confronted local authorities, demanding immediate action. This is not the green desert we were promised, one farmer told reporters. This is a white wave of hunger. In some areas, the ground showed signs of overgrazing, plants stripped down to bare roots, leaving soil exposed to wind erosion. The government responded by deploying wildlife teams to monitor the rabbit population. Predator reintroduction programs were hastily rolled out, bringing in hawks and foxes from other regions. Some scientists also suggested fencing off key farming areas to prevent conflict between agriculture and the rabbits' roaming habits. International reaction remained divided. Conservation groups from Europe and Asia sent teams to study the unfolding events, hoping to gather real-world data on large-scale biological interventions in arid zones. At the same time, some news outlets painted the project as an impending ecological catastrophe, comparing it to a ticking time bomb made of fur. Through it all, Ibrahim Traoré remained steadfast. In an interview with a Pan-African news network, he defended his vision. Great changes come with risk, he said calmly. Our desert has been growing for decades. We cannot wait for perfect solutions. We must act, and if we must adjust, we will adjust. As the seasons turned, early data began to show a mixed picture. In certain test plots where rabbits had been released under controlled conditions, vegetation cover had indeed increased. The soil retained more moisture, and hardy shrubs had begun to take root. In uncontrolled zones, however, the rabbits' appetites proved too much for fragile ecosystems, and further desert degradation was observed. Asterisk, the project's outcome was still far from certain. Supporters hailed it as a pioneering step in African-led climate adaptation, while critics called for scaling it back before irreversible damage occurred. Trory ordered the creation of a desert ecology task force to study results over the next 5 years. Asterisk for the people living near the experiment. Life went on now with the added presence of countless rabbits darting through the sand. Children named them, traders sold woven rabbit fur trinkets, and local markets saw a spike in rabbit meat sales. For some, it was an inconvenience. For others, an unexpected economic boost. Asterisk one thing was undeniable. The desert had changed. Whether it was for better or worse remained to be seen. But the image of millions of rabbits racing across the sunlit dunes had already secured a place in history. A reminder that bold visions can be both inspiring and perilous. Asterisk, and somewhere in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Trory likely watched the unfolding story with quiet determination, convinced that history would remember him not as a reckless dreamer, but as the man who dared to wake the desert. 6 months after the first wave of rabbits spilled into the Sahel sands, the Trory experiment had become more than a local controversy. It was a full-blown global case study. Environmental journals published heated debates. Satellite images were dissected by experts, and schoolchildren in far-off countries were assigned essays about the strange event in Burkina Faso. Asterisk, but on the ground, the reality was more complex than any headline could capture. Asterisk, by early summer, the rabbit population had already multiplied beyond the original 1.2 million. Official counts estimated nearly 2.5 million hopping across the release zone, with some herds pushing deep into neighboring provinces. Even the task force created by Trory struggled to keep up with the speed of reproduction. Asterisk, this is both astonishing and alarming, said Dr. Mbe during a live broadcast from one of the field camps. We're witnessing nature's raw potential, an explosion of life in a place we once called barren. But the ecosystem is under strain, and strain was everywhere. In certain pockets of the desert, vegetation cover had doubled. Hardy shrubs and desert grasses flourished where burrows had softened the ground. Villagers in those zones noticed more birds arriving, drawn by the sudden abundance of insects that thrived on the plants. In other places, however, the opposite occurred. Green shoots barely sprouted before being devoured by the relentless nibbling of rabbits. Asterisk, conflicts with farmers worsened. In the province of Soum, an angry crowd gathered outside a government office, holding up bundles of destroyed millet plants. "This is not the future we want," shouted one farmer. "Our fields feed our children, not your rabbits." Asterisk, the government attempted to calm tensions by offering financial compensation for crop losses. At the same time, it launched an ambitious predator management plan. Dozens of trained hawks, several packs of foxes, and even a small number of African wildcats were introduced into targeted areas. The goal was to create a natural check on the rabbits, without resorting to mass culling. Asterisk, but introducing predators came with its own problems. Some hawks flew beyond the designated zone and began preying on poultry in nearby villages. Foxes raided goat pens, and the wildcats, while effective hunters, were so elusive that tracking them became nearly impossible. Asterisk, international scientists were fascinated. Teams from Japan, Brazil, and South Africa set up observation posts, each trying to measure soil moisture, plant diversity, and the rabbits' movement patterns. One Japanese researcher, Dr. Kenji, described the project as a living laboratory, on a scale we could never simulate in controlled environments. He was cautiously optimistic. If the population stabilizes, we may see a transformation of the desert. If it doesn't, well, history will remember this as a warning. Meanwhile, Ibrahim Traoré remained a polarizing figure. Supporters hailed him as a visionary, willing to take unprecedented action against climate change. Critics painted him as a reckless leader gambling with nature for political glory. Asterisk, in a rare, unfiltered interview, Traoré addressed his critics. "Our ancestors faced drought and adapted. They worked with the land, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding. This is no different. If we do nothing, the desert wins. If we act, we have a chance." Asterisk, but behind the scenes, government reports hinted at mounting challenges. Grain reserves in certain regions were being depleted faster than planned. Water wells near rabbit clusters showed signs of increased sediment from loosened soil. Even the task force's private assessments admitted that without stricter population control, the experiment could spiral. Then came the sandstorm. In late July, a massive haboob swept across the release zone, a wall of dust stretching hundreds of kilometers. It lasted nearly 9 hours, burying young plants and disorienting wildlife. Thousands of rabbits perished, either from suffocation or starvation in the days that followed. Yet paradoxically, the storm also reshaped parts of the land. Buried seeds germinated weeks later, fed by rare pockets of moisture trapped beneath the dust layer. Asterisk, scientists rushed to record the effects. Some declared the storm an unplanned natural regulator of the rabbit population. Others worried it was just a temporary setback before the next population surge. Meanwhile, the cultural impact of the rabbits grew in unexpected ways. Artists painted murals of the desert awakening, depicting waves of rabbits leaping under a golden sun. Poets wrote about resilience and abundance. Markets sold chori stew made with rabbit meat, while traders exported rabbit hides to neighboring countries. But for people living in the balance zone, a fragile strip between restored patches and overgrazed wastelands, the reality was stark. Every day is a race, said Fatima, a widow tending a small sorghum field. We chase the rabbits in the morning, patch the fence at noon, and pray at night. 6 months turned into 8, and then into a year since the release. By then, the first comprehensive ecological report was ready. It revealed 3 key findings. 1. Regeneration zones. In about 20% of the release area, vegetation cover increased significantly, attracting more wildlife and stabilizing the soil. 2. Degradation zones. Roughly 40% of the area saw worsening erosion due to overgrazing, with no signs of natural recovery. 3. Neutral zones. The remaining areas showed little change, acting as transit corridors for rabbit migration. The report concluded that without adaptive management, seasonal relocation, controlled breeding, and expanded predator programs, the degradation zones would expand. The findings reached Chory's desk, and for the first time, he publicly admitted the scale of the challenge. We dreamed big, he said in a national address. We must now work smarter. This is not the end of the vision, but the beginning of its refinement. Internationally, the project had inspired copycat proposals. A group in Mongolia considered releasing marmots to combat steppe degradation. In Chile, scientists debated using hares to revive semi-arid valleys. All eyes remained on Burkina Faso, watching whether the million rabbits would become a model or a cautionary tale. In the heart of the desert, the rabbits continued their endless dance, digging, eating, breeding, and moving with the wind. For them, there was no politics, no strategy, only survival. But for the people of Burkina Faso, the stakes were far higher. This was about more than rabbits. It was about the fight for a future where the desert didn't claim everything in its path. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sand in shades of blood orange, an old Tuareg proverb came to mind, whispered by a field researcher who had been there since day one. When you wake the desert, you must be ready for what else wakes with it. The second year of the Chori experiment began with an uneasy calm. The sandstorms had passed, the first predator waves had settled into the ecosystem, and the rabbits, though still abundant, were no longer multiplying at the explosive rate of the early months. To the untrained eye, it seemed as if nature was finding its balance. But those working on the ground knew better. This was not balance. It was a pause before the next shift. The Desert Ecology Task Force had been working day and night, implementing a revised management strategy. Key measures included seasonal relocation of rabbits to undergrazed areas, expanded predator territories, and a controversial fertility control program that introduced a harmless vaccine to slow reproduction rates. The program was designed to target just enough of the population to stabilize growth without causing a sudden collapse. For a while, the results looked promising. Satellite images showed that the most successful regeneration zones were expanding, with shrubs and low trees slowly reclaiming dunes. Farmers in those regions reported fewer crop raids, and predator populations, hawks, foxes, and wildcats were thriving. More importantly, the neutral zones, once just barren corridors, were beginning to sprout pockets of hardy vegetation. Yet trouble was brewing in the degradation zones. The task force had underestimated how far the rabbits would roam in search of food. Small nomadic herds began to appear hundreds of kilometers beyond the original release area, crossing into Mali, Niger, and even Ghana. While Burkina Faso's government had cautiously accepted the chaos as part of the plan, neighboring countries were less forgiving. In Mali, the Ministry of Agriculture accused Burkina Faso of exporting an ecological problem, claiming that the rabbits were damaging millet and bean crops in border villages. Niger demanded immediate intervention and even threatened to close certain trade routes unless Burkina Faso took responsibility. Diplomatic tensions rose quickly. The African Union called an emergency environmental summit in Addis Ababa to address the issue. Their Chori stood before a hall of skeptical leaders. We began this journey to fight the desert, he told them. But deserts do not respect borders, and neither does life. This is a continental struggle. If we succeed here, others will benefit. If we fail, we all pay the price. His words won him polite applause, but few solid commitments. Most nations wanted proof before offering help. Meanwhile, in the field, the rabbits' adaptability continued to surprise scientists. Some had altered their diets, feeding on tougher desert plants that most herbivores ignored. Others had adapted to night foraging, avoiding predators and extreme heat. This behavior, while fascinating to biologists, made control efforts harder. Then came an unexpected twist. The predators introduced into the ecosystem began moving beyond their assigned areas. Foxes traveled dozens of kilometers in search of prey, and hawks migrated along the rabbits' new routes. This unplanned expansion inadvertently created a chain reaction. Small rodent populations dropped sharply, insect balances shifted, and, in some areas, local lizard species declined. The experiment was no longer just about rabbits. It had become a full-scale ecological reshaping. By mid-year, a faction within the Burkina Faso parliament demanded the program be scaled down. They cited budget overruns, diplomatic strain, and the growing list of ecological side effects. But Traoré refused to halt the project. "We are in the middle of the story," he told reporters. "You don't close the book when the plot gets complicated." Still, the financial burden was undeniable. Maintaining monitoring teams, compensating farmers, and managing predator programs drained resources. International grants helped, but they came with strings. Foreign scientists wanted greater control over field operations. Then nature threw another curveball. In late spring, heavy rains swept across parts of the Sahel, far more than average for that season. While this brought relief to many drought-hit communities, it also triggered an explosion of plant growth and with it, a rabbit population surge. In just 3 months, the estimated number of rabbits rose from 2.3 million to over 3 million. The fertility control program couldn't keep pace. At the same time, regeneration zones flourished like never before. Rivers that had been dry for years briefly flowed again, carrying seeds across vast distances. Some villages reported bumper harvests thanks to improved soil conditions from years of rabbit burrowing and fertilization. It was proof that the concept could work if only the balance could be maintained. But in degradation zones, the rains were a curse. Overgrazing meant there was little vegetation to hold the soil, so flash floods carved deep gullies into the land. What was once merely barren sand became eroded wasteland, harder to recover than before. The split between success and failure had never been so stark. By year's end, the task force released its second annual report. It classified the experiment into 3 scenarios. 1. Model zones 2, 25% of the original area, showed sustainable vegetation recovery, balanced predator-prey relationships, and minimal human conflict. 2. Critical zones 2, 35% faced severe overgrazing, soil erosion, and cross-border rabbit migrations. 3. Variable zones 2, 40% fluctuated between improvement and decline, depending on rainfall and predator activity. The report recommended reducing rabbit numbers in critical zones by at least 40% through relocation or humane culling, while expanding predator density in variable zones. Traoré approved the plan. Publicly but behind closed doors, insiders revealed he struggled with the idea of culling. He had built his political image on life awakening the desert, and killing rabbits risked undermining that message. In the final months of the year, teams began the delicate process of trapping and relocating thousands of rabbits to controlled breeding facilities. Some were moved to secure, fenced regeneration projects in other parts of the country. Others were sold to foreign zoos and research programs. The work was exhausting and dangerous. Field teams faced sandstorms, heat waves, and the occasional hostility of communities who either wanted all the rabbits gone or, conversely, feared losing the economic benefits they brought. In a televised year-end address, Traoré spoke with uncharacteristic gravity. This has been a year of lessons, he said. We have seen the desert bloom, and we have seen it bleed. Nature does not change on our schedule. It tests us, and we must pass the test not with haste, but with wisdom. The speech was met with cautious approval. Farmers in the model zones praised the government for sticking with the vision. Critics in the critical zones remained unconvinced. International observers agreed on one thing. The Traoré experiment was now the most ambitious and controversial ecological restoration effort in modern history. Whether it would end in triumph or collapse was still uncertain. But one thing was clear: Burkina Faso and much of the Sahel would never be the same. And somewhere in the dunes, under the pale moonlight, millions of rabbits moved silently through the night, oblivious to the debates they had sparked, carrying with them the fragile hope or the looming threat of a desert forever changed.